My Master's Sandals, Chapter 22. With the commitment to return within 3 months, I requested a vacation. I traveled to the United States for the first time. During this period, New York City, where I stayed, had a strange feeling of knowing the streets and avenues much earlier. This was a consequence of having experienced astral travel in the previous years. The exact images of what I was living had come to my mind. Everything seemed known. It transported me as a normal without paying much attention to what was happening. I had the same frustrations of every immigrant. I missed my family, my country's social customs, and I had to adapt to a new way of life. I felt isolated. After 3 months, I returned as agreed. I worked for a few weeks and gave myself time to talk to my superiors to be able to resign respectfully at my job. I thanked them for everything I had learned and gained in this life experience. I also thought about my mother, who stayed with me through this period of abundance. I protected her with my presence, my love and dedication with the necessary maturity. I absorbed the past and never had any word of reproach towards her, or on the contrary, she had achieved a slight improvements in her mental stability. She was calm with fewer schizophrenia symptoms and the bipolar disorder that trapped her for many years. My brothers visited too, and I had made a very special connection with her. We spent afternoons together with my guitar in hand, singing songs for her. She liked this very much. We'd share long moments of appreciative happiness. Sometimes questions about my childhood kept appearing for her. She always kept a very deep memories that arose when she was alone. The idea that caused me serious damage and was a bad mom flowed briefly in her memory. She sought my forgiveness. She did not want to die hearing anything bad about her come from my lips. She attempted to show the tender side that I had always tried to find in her before. I never spoke about this situation. I tried to make her feel the best possible during our days together. She felt a degree of guilt and appeared in her lucid state. Allowing a lot of affection, unconditional love, and the understanding to flow to her is how I handled it. In the meeting of Mr. Juan Ramirez, a person to whom I owed full thanks and respect, I explained the reason for my departure, likewise requesting a letter clarifying that I had rendered my services at the Sheraton Hilton in the Dominican Republic to reference work to another Sheraton hotel in America. This would serve as proof required by a New York City hotel workers union, and I would have a job opportunity. After finishing the respective documentations, my farewell was announced. My colleagues and bosses attended my departure. They wished me for the best future to come. I felt very nostalgic, but at this time pleased to have left a good image as a person and worker. This ended one of the most critical stages of my life. I had developed values and experienced a vocation that was on the rise with each passing year. I had met great people and forged lasting friendships over time. I built the best moments with my mother and had unforgettable afternoons that were the reason we relived so many lost stages. We were able to forget about the bad experiences of the past. I understood that life was so beautiful when you're young to forgive and overcome hatred and evil. Giving the best of ourselves to the people we have is an incredible feeling, such as a long journey. I have learned to feel what was to love my mother with all my heart. Faced with the decision I had to make to leave for America, I arrived again in New York City despite being full of nostalgia and sadness. I immediately started with the first objective, which was to find a job. I showed up at the Hotel Union where the requested documentation. I had interviewed with one of the representatives who explained that I should have patience because the positions to start were very provisional, covering vacations and temporary vacations. After a week, I called to start at the Hensley Winslow Hotel in the cleaning department, where I spent almost 3 months doing what I was told to do. Then they sent me to the Marriott Marquis in the banquet department, in which I spent another 2 months. I also went to the Swiss Hotel in the same department. I knew that at some point the opportunity would come to be more stable. I just had to wait a little while and gain more experience and knowledge. After getting to join the union as an associate one morning, I went to the restaurant located in the famous Twin Towers to start as an assistant in the kitchen. I went only for a short time, became a host due to my confidence and assertiveness. I was given the opportunity in several languages in that position. I began to feel more comfortable and adapted more quickly to the American way of life, but I wanted to achieve other goals. The World Trade Centers located in Lower Manhattan in New York City had been the Twin Towers, an embolic place. Constructions on the towers was completed in April 4th, 1973. Each one had 110 floors in its structure, classified as the tallest in the world for its construction. This was a place that had become an episode of destruction, terror, death, and sadness on September 11, 2001. More than 3,000 people died that day and thousands disappeared. The attack went down in history as one of the worst catastrophics in the world. Along with the working at the Twin Tower restaurant, I also had night shift at the Hotel St. Regis, very prestigious place located in Manhattan between 55th Street and 5th Avenue. Along with working at the there I worked as a man cleaning throughout the morning. I was at the stage where the process of growth and job stability began. I looked like the atmosphere of the area. Whenever I had a free moment, I went down to the restaurant to a bookstore in front of the building, where I bought the same books that I had read in Spanish, but this time in English. This helped me to exercise my taste for reading and learn the language better. Although the place was a center visited by thousands of people daily, I felt like it was the way of finding myself again. I even looked for the interaction with the voice, which, during my lifetime, as I mentioned before, only appeared in difficult situations where I was lost personal control. There was a little that I analyzed about the voice. It happened in a spontaneous way, but it did not occur to me to pay more attention to it. Everything was going in the best way. I was very punctual and responsible in both my jobs. Within me, there was an eagerness to grow and prove myself more. perhaps even achieve bigger goals. I knew it was too early to think about some of them, but to improve my life became an obsession present at all times. Then conversations with the voice began to appear frequently, especially in the hours where loneliness caused me fear, doubt, and anguish. It was one of those mornings I woke up around 4 to get ready to go to work. Many of my days off at the Hotel Regis were dedicated to the restaurant. This was one of those days. I had redoubled efforts and I was making money. However, a strange feeling bothered me and I did not feel normal that day. I didn't have the same drive to propel me forward and felt physically and mentally lethargic. I had never had an excuse for missing work or even being late. That was so unlike me. I had resisted it and I entered the shower to get ready for work, and a voice appeared saying, "Maybe you shouldn't go to work today. If you don't feel well, you can tell them and say you're not going. They will look for someone else to replace you. Remember that if you don't feel well, you shouldn't go." Still very convinced, I finished showering and looked at my clothes. I started to change and the voice repeated to me, "Maybe you shouldn't go to work today. Maybe it's better to stay. If you don't feel well, you can call them. Do it now." A strange feeling that I didn't understand permeated my insides. This was such an abnormal thing for me to do, and I almost felt like I was doing something wrong. I did not finish changing. Instead, I stayed a few minutes sitting on my bed, taking in what had been suggested. I returned from the senseless emptiness that held me without moving, my gaze that had remained straight without specific point of vision. When I tried to stand up for the third time, the voice told me, "Maybe you should stay if you don't feel well. It's better not to go to work today." I went to the phone without further thought. I contacted my immediate supervisor, letting him know that I was unwell and I couldn't go to work. He accepted this without asking any questions, with just wishing me improvements. Half changed and almost ready, I returned to my bedroom and rested a few more minutes without much concern. The restaurant was located on the 106th and 107th floor of the North Tower, and my work on my days off the hotel was as a host. Some days I would work as an assistant in the kitchen at that stage. I was being trained at the Hotel St. Regis for the butler position. I would be taking the morning shift. On September 11, 2001, after 8 in the morning, half asleep, I turned on my television from bed. The first fire image did not attract much attention to me, thinking about any news of the moment. I closed my eyes for another 20 minutes, and I woke up again seeing the same news continue to spread. My first impression that this was a fatal event, and it turned into news into a larger portion of the day. So I began to change channels. I realized that this was something more severe than I imagined. All the television stations concentrated their transmission on this one catastrophe. Fully aware now, I saw how an airplane impacted the second tower, while the other one caught fire. The news kept showing the terrible situation. The amazement of the pain that was so profound caused me to feel something indescribable. There was an incomparable sadness when seeing and terrifying images live on TV. The news reporter announced that the second plane hit the Twin Tower, and all I could do is cry uncontrollably without being able to recover. My crying was instant. I tried to calm my pain, but with such a strong feeling. I did not realize a feel that I was living meant something beyond the news television showing heartbreaking images. Incredibly terrible, people running terrified, wrapped in a kind of black earth product from the explosions. Police and firefighters fought against the cruelty that had occurred, seeking to save lives in tow of their own. There was a cloud of smoke that covered the sky, hiding the passage of death and destruction. Everyone was filled with panic and uncertainty. The fact that I had stayed at home because of my discomfort, the appearance of the voice telling me to take the day off, and having convinced myself after listening to it all had lined up to save my life. With tears in my eyes, I realized how fortunate I was to be alive, as the planes had struck the exact place where I would have been for work. I was granted the opportunity to continue my life instead of being part of that tragedy. The minutes passed and I looked for a way to calm myself. I went to the kitchen for a little water. It was there that my mind began to draw my colleagues' images, the people who worked with me and who were caught in a sea of fire. I quickly returned to look for the answer on the news. However, the television was then showing me how the first tower had vanished and collapsed, taking thousands of human lives. There were innocent people, men, women, praying for other humans' actions. In a few minutes, the second tower suffered from the same event. An intense rage welled up inside of me and caused me to ask the voice, "That's why you told me not to go to work. It was the event that made you appear. You wanted me to prevent me from going." I kept waiting to hear the answer and I felt terrible. "You didn't tell me the truth, but that's why you told me not to go." The voice never answered me. I was filled with a void that I could not avoid, the bitterness from not being able to hear the answer overwhelming my being. I could not believe that the voice knew what had happened and that it could have been avoided. With time, I understood that the voice remained silent and never spoke to me about what was going to happen on that day, and that I would never have possibly the feeling of guilt for being saved when so many died, and also that I would not feel responsible for not being able to tell the people soon enough before it happened. How could I prove to anyone else that I knew what was about to happen anyway? Even if I knew, no one would believe something crazy like that. After the events occurred, how would I explain to the people that they would understand how I knew what was going to happen? I would have branded as crazy. Maybe I would have been forced to get involved in the delicate investigation because the calming to know something or be involved in the situation on any level. I realized that this was predestined to happen, that it was already chosen to occur with or without my involvement. Undoubtedly, after a few hours, I was trying to recover from the fatal state of mind. The tragedy's magnitude kept me in anguish, and the mental tension due to the number of questions that overwhelmed me like a constant hammering in my head. It was tough to fall asleep that night and the next morning. I did not know who to call or ask about my colleagues or work. The company's phones were disconnected. Everything around me continued with one global uncertainty. I tried all day to do my personal search, but with negative results. The perimeter of the towers were inaccessible. The city woke in chaos with thousands of people asking family and friends who had been present at the time of the tragedy. This was a complete confusion for everyone. I never knew what happened to all those I worked with. I could only imagine. I had to go at night to work at the Hotel St. Regis, where I received training for my butler's position at that time. During the first week, my colleagues at the hotel joined together with prayer, song, candle lighting, and what kept burning all night. It was only 1 in 1,000 tributes worldwide paid for those who had died in the towers. It was a time of reflection, pain, and much sadness. Thinking of the event produces me to know an intense feeling of mourning. I avoided the subject as much as possible, having an anonymous survivor of the ruthless attack and the feeling of having suffered the same result as those that made me hide and remain silent for many years after having lived through that terrible experience. The voice through me, explaining what happened with the Twin Towers so that human beings could understand. It is quite tricky. This starts with a belief that everything ends with death. It's not yet understood that life is eternal and that it never ceases to exist. Instead, most people see that the human's body perish. The experience are physical and non-physical at the same time. The same voice that had always accompanied me in non-physical parts of my life is eternal. Trying to explain the events of September 11, 2001, where the physical form had perished, is difficult. Undoubtedly, it is little understanding of how human beings currently see life. They see it with a beginning and an end. The essence of life, the active force that keeps the body alive, the spirit, is eternal, returns to this planet Earth to have new experience after so-called death. Although I tried to explain its accessibility, let's say that the bodies or vehicles that cease to have life changed in tonality or in human frequency. From all parts of the world, the events of September 11th gathered attention. The prayers, the feelings for one another, the compassion, the result from the losses experienced in the towers raised the vibration of love on this planet. This event taught humans how to appreciate life, value what they have, even if it's just being alive, loving ourselves, being united in a beautiful experience. This was an example of how to change the vibration and the conditional feelings towards an event to an unconditional one and hold it. It was a challenging stage for most of the inhabitants of this land. Still, at the same time, the message, that of compassion and love, should not only occur with catastrophic events, but at all times. The purpose is to awaken to love, compassion, and unity. This is the objective of physical life. Love should not wait regretfully for sad events, death, and destruction. Being able to practice the true reason for the earthly existence at all times is essential. Love one another. After the catastrophic events, I stayed working at the night at the St. Regis Hotel during the cleaning work. During my life, I did thousands of things to improve myself. These events gave me an even bigger reason to apply myself, get ahead, and take more responsibility. I was determined to defeat any obstacle that appeared to me. In those circumstances, I met the person to whom I gave all confidence to write this book, my friend, Mario Ramos. By getting to know each other, our friendship began to gain family values, creating a spiritual, energetic connection. It was divine. He nuanced each and of my experience throughout my existence, expressing each event as personally lived testimony. All of this being wonderfully converted into each story that you are now enjoying on each of these pages. This was a magical connection that made his pen write accurately and expertly. Mario has recorded all the moments since childhood, and the sequel to this book will come also. I am entirely grateful for more than 20 years of friendship with Mario, a great human being with an exemplary person who has earned all of my trust. My life story has been written by emotional inspiration, which requires a very advanced connection between two people linked with that transcends human understanding. With time, Mario Ramirez will realize that when I say we are one, I don't say it because that sounds good. No, we are the same energy, expressing itself in many different ways, in many inhuman bodies. We are the same infinite energy. That's why the experience is so real, magical. It is the vibration that emanates the same sound on the same frequency. My Master's Sandals, Chapter 23. The voice through me. After the fall of the Twin Tower in New York, many things changed around the world. A sense of compassion nurtured the hearts of many human beings. It is not very positive or helpful if unconditional love is only if a catastrophic event occurs. Unity, support, and love are to be experienced all the time. We walked through the city in a dim, dark environment with the smell of death and destruction. It infiltrated my soul, and the sadness of remembering so many colleagues and friends that touched my memory with so much uncertainty in the air. I doubted how I would live off one job. I still had not a permanent position, but I didn't think it was enough. I decided to look for a second job. My first objective was to get a license to drive taxis in New York City. I received my first tax return and allowed me to start saving. This was an opportunity to buy a vehicle and start making money. However, I did not have the experience to succeed quite yet. I listened to some tips on how to start taxing. I put the car for rent. I let others use it. I only had a good experience with my first driver, named Eldorado. The rest of the four drivers I let rent the car caused problems. Sometimes the car didn't come back on time even though I had my own car. I started having to make arrangements to get to and from my own job. On top of that, I only had a permanent job salary to help me pay for the car. I still owed the bank for it because I could not pay for a vehicle outright. I had to pay for a special license to the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, a full coverage insurance since I was making payments on the car. All of this time, about $1,000 per month. This was a big headache. Without any experience as a taxi driver, I had an obligation to learn. I was in business with many debts already after contemplating my job at the hotel during 5 regular days. I began working as a taxi driver. I was standing on 167th Street in the Bronx with the car parked for approximately 4 hours. One afternoon, a lot of snow fell, the depths overwhelmed me, and I was only thinking about how to start a tour of the surrounding area. I could not build a good idea to begin it until I stayed fast asleep. In my dreams, the voice appeared saying, "Don't worry, this is temporary. You're going to learn this business if it is what you want." Between the good and bad days, about 6 months passed, adapting to getting to know the streets of New York. There was no help from the GPS at that time, so I bought a laptop that served as a guide. I didn't want to get lost or be late. I had been losing patience many times as I kept having to look for directions. I had learned the roads without a lot of effort. I had traveled the roads continuously until I had routes memorized. One day, someone recommended I started working with vouchers. If I began accepting vouchers, I could transport employees from companies who paid the fare for some of their employees. I received a voucher from an employer needing to take a ride, and the company would pay me instead of the individual. I managed to do this service on Broadway and 48 in Manhattan, serving Morgan Stanley employees who left after 7 at night. I covered cities as far as Connecticut, Delaware, Staten Island, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. I served as a taxi for about 5 or 6 years on my 2 days off from the hotel. One morning I was returning on a dark road from a part of the city after dropping off a client. I felt exhausted. Suddenly a truck that was coming very close hit the back of my car. Later I learned that the driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. Within seconds I lost control of the car and tried to hit the brakes. The vehicle spun several times on its axis. Later I closed my eyes, thinking the worst, when I heard the voice say, "Do not accelerate, do not brake, release the wheel." I stopped and did what it said, and the car kept spinning without overturning. It sat still without moving, keeping my eyes closed and afraid. Of constant cold feeling ran over my body. The car had collided with the guardrails on the highway. It caused the vehicle to stop there instead of toppling over the rail. I had been saved from a massive fall. Things happened in a few seconds. The truck continued. It never stopped at the scene of the accident or offered to help. At that time in the morning, there was hardly any cars on the road to be witnessed help. I got up slowly in the dark and managed to get myself out of the vehicle with some difficulty. I saw my car in a horrible condition, and I was able to make it home to rest my sore body. The car was unusable and totaled, a complete loss. I had no way to prove the accident's consequences to the insurance company, and I was left in debt of $10,000. The bank charged me for the loan, and I was not able to use the vehicle again. During those years, I did not feel good with myself. I worked for the responsibility of having a family, but I was very hard on myself. I never felt the love that must have felt and what I was doing. For the few months, I sustained myself by working in the hotel only. However, because of the debt I still owed to the bank, I looked to start driving a taxi again. I bought a new vehicle, and this time I joined a service company to make sure I would have clients. One afternoon, I was returning to the Bronx County to Manhattan at the height of 67th Street and FDR Drive. A car passed by my side at high speed. I caught glimpse for a few seconds. I immediately felt the brutal impact around the back of my taxi and left me instantly unconscious. I did not know exactly how much time I was without consciousness, but when I woke up, police and paramedics surrounded me and I was taken to the hospital. The pain in my neck and back were quite severe. I was sedated and almost asleep. I felt tired. This caused me to allow questions to take into a downward spiral. I could not find myself for a long time. I wondered why these things were happening to me. I wanted to progress and get ahead. However, every attempt, I was causing myself more problems. This did not make sense to me at all because my intentions were good. The voice suddenly interrupted. Things happen to you because you insist on doing the wrong thing. Maybe you should change the course so that the negative turns into prosperity. When I recovered the first time, I did was go to the car dealer and tell him that I was returning the car. I no longer wanted it. Then surprised man asked me why, but I could not answer him with a valid explanation that made sense. I told the dealer do whatever he needed to do, even if it meant charging me for the car. Looking for money constantly was leading to my death. First, I had to decide to find myself again. I needed to become who I was. I had spent so much of my life frustrated and discouraged. I had always insisted on doing things my way instead of listening to who I truly was. I struggled against my real identity and went with the identity taught to me since childhood. My life that I had lived had set me up for failure, and so that's all I knew, how to continue living out, even though I was creating the constant cycle without being aware of it. My life changed from then on. I started using my time to learn more and more about the voice. Who said it was me? Because of my ways spoken in my life, I was led to realize myself as something more significant than I could have ever imagined. My Master Sandals, Chapter 24. The Mayan civilization has a culture development in an area called Mesoamerica. That is a region that began in Mexico and encompassed southern Central America. It was an ancient culture with many virtues that were based on superior intelligence. The concept left an enormous mark on its culture, which is now studied worldwide. I had different languages and focuses of writing that I used mathematical calculations. It was the most important numbering system, a sacred solar calendar. Constructions that showed the masterful architect astronomical connections and agricultural as a significant influence on life. According to the prophecies that are based on human perception, there are many interpretations. One of them was the Mayan calendar in the year 2012, would show us a certain outcome linked to the end of the world. Instead of being the end of the world, a changed vibration happened spiritually. Many human beings went through a shift in frequency and opened the opportunity for an entrance to portals with higher levels of consciousness that of the human consciousness. These portals opened communication and consciousness differently, causing a spiritual expansion in many parts of the world. The voice became something more alive, frequent, latent, and characteristic of identity. It was something that existed within the human experience, which until that year was previously unknown. The voice started to have broader and more depth conversations with me. These conversations were not only internal now, but were spread frequency throughout other people. The voice began to give pointers and ideas through me and written material. It used books, guides, videos, most of which is accessible on the internet. These materials promoted the concept and gaining a broader knowledge. Through thoughts, some of these guidelines were also given the awakening in me, a new understanding of the expansion of consciousness. I found answers to thousands of questions that haunted me for many years in each of these pathways. The voice began to appear deeply, and through it I came to know authors and teachers of so many books. Alan Watts, Judy Kurzmarty, James Robert, Seth Material, Esther Hicks Abraham, Dolores Cannon, Brian Wells, Many Lives and Masters, The Only Love, Milton Henderson, Dr. Bruce Goldberg, Traveler's Experience, Michael Newton, Journey of the Souls, Neil Donald Walsh, Conversations with God. Although I learned a lot from everyone, the later had impacted on me more than others. The authors and videos such as Dolores Cannon, Brian Weiss, Milton Erickson introduced me to the study of hypnosis. I kept reading and learning and taking courses to improve myself, as this was the way the voice began to communicate through other people. I developed my hypnosis knowledge. I dedicated most of my time entirely to study. I needed to enter the practice. Heidi was my first hypnotic experience that held valuable results. Previously, we had talked about it. She had many questions and curiosities about her past and current life. We attended Dr. Weiss's conference in New York City together. That increased her interest due to the multiple conversations we had developed on the subject. One afternoon, I had been surprised by some tickets for that conference, which we shared with some friends who were also following the study of hypnotherapy. It was a gratifying experience. Dr. Weiss presented a reasonably broad theory about demonstrations with his audience. My friend put into practice the method she explained during the extended stay of her intervention. Surprised Heidi agreed to conduct the past life regression sessions with me in her apartment in Queens, New York. It was the month of May, a rainy day. The temperature was quite pleasant. She prepared dinner for us, which we happily shared. I interrupted her often with comments of what she had experienced that afternoon at the conference. I was very anxious to have the opportunity to carry out my own experience privately. We each sat on the furniture facing each other, and we stared using our technique we learned that day. We started with a firm, slow voice. We did a short breathing exercise. I asked her to close her eyes and concentrate and imagine herself entering a train. The train served as a small kind of personal ship that transported her to different time and place. Maintaining the same slow voice, I began to instruct her to visualize her entrance. She took her head to affirm that she was doing what I was saying. Heidi went into a trance quite quickly, and I could not decipher when she entered the trance exactly, since it was my first session. I wasn't until later with more practice that I understood when people entered this trance. As I advanced, my words seemed to open the way to take her to a specific time where she would begin to give shape to our first hypnotic experience. I told her that the train was about to leave and that she should nod her head signal me not to be able to continue the session. Once the motion of the train continued, heading towards a quiet, extensive tunnel, it was found to exit toward a light. At the other end of it, it served as the entrance to the door of the past. The train would cross the darkness inside the tunnel upon stopping somewhere in time. I asked her if she could see her body and where she could get out of the ship. She replied after a few seconds. This time was a low-pitched and slowly articulated words saying she couldn't see herself, just the light surrounding her in a deep void. She went on to say that the light was glowing very brightly. She named the lights as her friends. This was energy without specific form, nameless, and were found in natural form. Heidi went on to say that she felt very calm, full of peace, and found harmony in that made her feel good. She asked me if she could stay there for a few minutes. Without intervening, I let her stay in the state without questioning her for approximately 10 minutes. After that period, she said, leisurely voice, I told her that she should return to the train and it would appear again. And when this happened, she would tell me again with a nod of her head that she was ready to enter it. In the visualization, she carried out intricate steps. She schemed without being interrupted. She only spoke when asked, and when she was virtually inside the train, a technique that I had created, she did not express any word. I made this mention because with the passage of our sessions, she began to interpret occasionally when she was inside the train without me having to tell her to do so. When she returned to the present, I told her to breathe deeply and open her eyes. She did it slowly, and when I saw her recovered from the trance, I asked her how she felt. Undoubtedly, the experience was excellent for both of us, following each step of what was learned. We were able to put the knowledge into practice, which was the reason she felt so satisfied with the results we were experiencing. Heidi kept feeling happy about reality and the place she had visited. She called it home. It was an incredible vision. She remembered the lights, the brilliance around her, the non-physical form of all the radiance that arose without explaining that energy. It was a fantastic way to start a new path that would lead to change my life. She became more interested in reading. She was looking up information. Where'd she get more knowledge? I helped her look for Dr. Weiss's books on regression and reincarnation. We agreed to meet for a weekend to do a new practice. We maintained communication during the week, and when it was Friday, that I went to her apartment. She very cordially prepared dinner, and after sharing it, we began work. I used the same sequence of the train. This time, I added another variable. After starting with the ship's ascent and the arrival of a particular place, Heidi began to narrate a new experience from very remote times. She described herself as a woman dressed in the skin of an animal. She walked through a place full of people dressed in very similar ways. She felt very unpleasant smell that came from the dead animals that were around her. She described a lot of mud, dirty surroundings, danger, and something to be feared. She was experiencing a kind of village where people gathered. It was then that I intervened and asked her to move away and go home. I asked her if she had family in that place. She answered saying that she lived with her mother and her little brother while it was a dirty place. After a few minutes, she told me that she had was already at home. I told her to say hello to her mother. It was something extraordinarily happened. Heidi spoke the language she had never heard. Surprised, I asked her the meaning, and she answered that with her native language. She did not know the place's name or the language when describing the cave or shack. She mentioned a dangerous dark place with fear denoted on her face, lit up like an oil lamp. It was in the middle of the night where the mighty storm began to fall, accompanied by thunder. I felt her immense into the story. She showed surprising reality with every word. Her gestures of fear made me feel to ask her to leave that place and go to the train as soon as possible. Heidi returned from the trance after performing the sequence in the opposite direction. I spoke to her with calmness, necessarily to calm her down. She still showed features of fear. She opened her eyes, and the first thing she was to ask me never to return to that place. It was explained that she had only visited one memory. I wrote down in a notebook each question I had and the answers she gave. I wanted to document the strange occurrence where different languages were spoken. She was still a little annoyed by the session, so I invited her to go to a nearby bar. We had a drink of a glass of wine and analyzed the second exercise together. I wanted her to feel more comfortable with the session, and this helped to move us forward to get to better know the steps to follow for the next session. After leaving her at home, I returned to my house. I kept a record of weekly sessions. I enriched myself each time with the new experience, reaching different points of past lives. This collaboration with Heidi was essential to strengthen my knowledge to acquire in all the years of reading and dedication. For her part, she showed her interest in participating voluntarily in each of the sessions, which became valuable and continued to offer learning. I followed it very closely with well-known people who had experienced in the world of hypnotherapy and regression. Dolores Cannon was one of them. She was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1931 and married Johnny Cannon in 1951, who began her hypnose research. She helped people with habits like smoking and also with the difficulty of losing weight. After a long journey of looking for the real value of her practice, Dolores Cannon created the quantum healing technique, which allowed distant contact with the subconscious. This is where she managed to obtain real answers to different questions and exact the basis for instant healing. The sessions were carried out on other people. Dolores Cannon had a woman as a patient who helped her with her hypnosis experience. Dolores led her 25 separate live regressions each time, each with spaces of 100 years. The woman adopted different personalities in the period, which notably helped her investigated history through these concepts. She wrote 2 more books and were based on her first was A Soul's Regression into Hiroshima in 1993. In this book, the woman transformed into a Japanese man's personality in Hiroshima, 1945, during the fall of the atomic bomb in World War II. The second was Jesus and the Essence, which talks about his life, a boy who was a teacher, the truths about Jesus' life and his personality characteristics. This fascinating book shows us the significance of a teacher and her relationship with Jesus. She published the third book as a continuation of the previous one, titled They Walk with Jesus, 1994. She describes the lives of two women who were close to Jesus at different periods of their lives. In the early 1980s, she suggested a woman who claimed to be a student of a French prophet, Michael del Nostradam, better known as Nostradamus. Nostradamus was famous for his prophecies. He announced events of great magnitude that were full of misfortune, destruction, which was happening throughout history. He predicted the murder of J.F. Kennedy and the attack of the flying birds in the city of Hollow Mountains, which refers to the attacks of September 11th. The war that followed the Middle East, among other prophecies. In one session, the woman described her life. Her personality suddenly changed. She appeared to act like that of Nostradamus himself. Through the woman, he began to speak to Dolores directly, wishing that she would write a book that would give humanity a better understanding of their prophecies. Following this message, Dolores Cannon wrote 3 serialized books called Conversations with Nostradamus. Dolores Cannon dedicated her life to the in-depth study of hypnosis at different stages. She published books and valuable information. This is just a short review of the extensive material by Dolores Cannon, who worked now and continues by her daughter, Julia Cannon. Julia is the director of the Quantum Healing Hypnosis Academy, where she teaches this technique created by her mother. She is the CEO of Ozark Mountain Publishing, Inc., founded by Dolores in 1992. The company was used to publish her books, as well as that of authors investigating metaphysics. I learned new fascinating techniques at the institution from another famous hypnotherapist, Milton Erickson. Milton Highland Erickson was an American psychiatrist who specialized in medical hypnosis and family therapy. He was the founding president of the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis. He stood out because he studied an unconscious and approach to create and generate solutions. Physical disabilities accompanied Dr. Erickson at age 17 when he contracted polio, leaving him paralyzed. Doctors believed he would die. While in bed, completely paralyzed in his limb, he developed a nonverbal communication. He used body language, the tone of his voice, and nonverbal expressions. He began to have body memories of the muscular activity of his body. He concentrated on those memories and slowly regained control of those parts, reaching the level of speaking and using his arms again. At this point, the doctors recommend that you exercise your upper body. That's when Milton Erickson planned a 1,000-mile canoe trip to strengthen himself to fulfill his desire to attend college. That challenging adventure led him to remarkable improvements, although he still didn't have full use of his leg. He finally was able to manage to walk with a cane. Dr. Erickson has over 50 years of extensive research and suggestions and hypnosis. He began as a college student in the University of Wisconsin. He continued doing his medical training and had his first initial professional appointments in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Michigan. In the late 1930s, Dr. Erickson was known for his hypnotist work and an eminent in psychiatric circles. In 1948, Dr. Erickson moved from Michigan to Phoenix, Arizona. In 1949, he started a private practice at his home due to his medical necessity. Constant, intense physical pain, progressive loss of mobility did not slow him down. Although he had remained in a wheelchair in his later years, Dr. Erickson was constant and very active. He was the founding president of the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis. He opened it with support of friends in 1957. He also established the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis, serving as an educator for a decade. During the 1950s and 60s, Dr. Erickson conducted various publications and conferences at home and abroad. Without leaving his research, he obtained much practice as a psychiatrist. In the 1970s, despite staying at home because of his physical conditions, he still conducted professional seminars daily. He fit into his schedule while he was caring for his patients. On March 25, 1980, he died at the age of 78, having reserved spaces for his seminars for an entire year and having requests from services extending into the following year. Dr. Erickson left a legacy with more than 140 academic articles and 5 written books on hypnosis. Another great researcher of our time was Dr. Brian Leslie Weiss. I had the opportunity to attend one of his events in New York City. This was another great impression on me in stating my practice of hypnosis. I studied his work extensively. Dr. Brian Weiss graduated from Columbia University and Yale Medical School. He was the president of psychiatry at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami. Here, an event was disclosed in a session with a patient. This led further analysis of his already achieved knowledge of his career as a psychotherapist. A woman began to decipher her past life trauma, apparently would take the key by her reoccurring nightmares and anxiety attacks. Dr. Weiss was skeptical and changed the expression when the woman began to channel messages from what they call space between lives, where the stories that contain remarkable revelations about Dr. Weiss's family and his deceased son years ago. Using past life therapy, he recovered the woman from her ills and has since engaged in the most in-depth investigation of this new phase. With around 4,000 patients in his psychiatric care, he has devoted himself to developing regression methods. Dr. Weiss gained vast experience in his Miami, Florida office. The regression techniques helped him to find the best way to heal thousands of people and decipher the content in each of their persons. He understood that remembering trauma from the past can be healed. Each person in his regression sessions showed characters that were really served as access to the existence of past lives. This included speaking in other languages without ever having learned or mentioning specific data to find missing persons. Dr. Weiss, the writer of 10 books, also conducted several national and international seminars, experimental workshops, and professional training programs. After a long phase of learning and feeding myself with knowledge, I had the opportunity to graduate as a hypnotherapist. I started each of my sessions with background music to relax the patient.